everyone, and welcome to China EVs and More, where my co-host, Lei Sheng, and I, Tu Li, will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the global EV, AV, and mobility sectors. What Lei and I discussed today is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. For those that are new to the show, welcome. And for those loyal listeners, welcome back. We ask that you please help us get the word out about this podcast to other enthusiasts. And of course, tune in again next week, where we will start doing this show again pretty regularly. My name is Tu Li. I'm the managing director at Sino Auto Insights, a global management consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at sinoautoinsights.substack.com. which of course I encourage you all to do. Lei, a Shanghai, a Beijing bound Lei or a Shenzhen bound Lei? Can you please introduce yourself?
Good morning from Shanghai, a rainy Shanghai. I believe this is my 20th day in China. If I did my math correctly, this is your co-host, Beijing, former chief editor of China Auto Review. And this is episode number 164, if we also did the math correct, because we kind of stopped for 3 weeks. Is that correct? Because
we did.
Time flies.
We provided different forms of content.
Yeah, and so we're exactly switched places. So the last time we did this live show, I was in the US. I think you just finished off with the Zeekr 09 launch event. And we just had another Zeekr important milestone earlier today, the IPO, ninth IPO of Eric, or Liu Shufu, of his conglomerate. And from everything in between, it's difficult to put into words or try to summarize in simple terms. There's been a lot going on, let's just say that.
So congratulations to the Zeekr team. We know a few of the people there. We know a few people at Geely. So happy for those guys. There's a nice pop, although the IPO target was dialed down significantly over the last few weeks, but they raised like $440 million worth of capital. So I think that should be helpful a little bit. It's not going to be a game changer, but I think it was great to see them able to make some positive gains out of it in the first days.
Yeah, and the Zeekr speed, 3 years, 37 months, and I think the interesting thing is they're starting off with positive margins, which is not something you normally see. I think last year was 15% gross margins, and they started off having positive margins the first year, I believe, in 2021. So I think that's something a bit different than the Wei Xiaoli's with the group backing and the really strong product lineup and momentum. But I think it's only one day. In this environment, we just heard about the tariffs, quadrupling of the tariffs on the Chinese EVs. So this is kind of right in a very interesting time period.
We left off the last live show, as you'd mentioned, 009 Grand launch in the Venice of China that I attended. It was a grand event. And Zeekr has always been very foreign media friendly. So I think that was one of the positives from the IPO, that they were able to get a lot of Western media's attention. And our friend of the show, Kevin Williams, he just dropped his article, big one, about his thoughts on the week he spent in China, test driving cars, talking to people like myself, you, Will, Mark, Ethan. So if you're wondering who those guys are, Will is China driven, Ethan is Wheels Boy, Mark is inside China Auto, and we're all friends. We all have a lot of respect for each other. We also saw Fate or Jiao Wei from CNBC Post and Jiri from Car News China. So
yeah, I'll see a couple of those Jiao Wei and some of those Jill and some other ones today, later on this afternoon. So catching up a little bit.
Okay.
It'd be nice after Beijing we caught up with those and Will in Changsha for that matter.
Yeah. So let's start off with maybe Lei, your thoughts and we won't dedicate this podcast to that, but let's say you have a couple days or a week, 2 weeks now to let Auto Beijing kind of marinate. Maybe we talk a little bit about the takeaways and kind of the trip we had, and then we get into a little more some of the immediate news with me attending that event yesterday, a new brand, and some events that are happening next week. So
Yeah, I mean it's nonstop action, right? Really, I haven't even had time to, just sit down and kind of put things into words or put thoughts into words. But I did have a chance to give a auto show recap earlier this week at the AmSham Shanghai, and basically what I did, and speaking of takeaways, I spent 3 days at the auto show. So from the 25th to 27th before our trip, and I'm just looking at my last slide that the takeaway. I put up a few bullet points. I'll just read it off. The one and only relevant and truly global auto show, party in a bloodbath, Legion and Xiaomi's world, the Beijing People Show, foreign automaker vengeance, new tech kids on the block, the end of new forces, 10x foreign faces, the second row battle, the chip war, the live stream war, Musk landing, Elon landing in China, FSD robotaxi. Let's talk. German Chancellor Scholz visit before and Xi's European trip after. Right? Putting these, simple what I saw. I just put up like 40 pictures that I took of the auto show and involving, people, signage, products, tech. And aside from that, I think two things that I think for this trip personally for me was really no longer getting that shock, but just seeing things as normal as they are. And it's no longer like it just felt normal once you're in it. Whereas last year I had that really big shock in Shanghai. And we actually recorded a video on our trip about the Beijing Auto Show. So we should.
that's episode 163 that will be launching next week. So
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, I said that it's shock 2.0, but that shock is just it's a fact of life, everyday life. It just felt I look at those green plates, in Shenzhen and anywhere, all the cities that we visited.
let me go ahead and talk about my thoughts a little bit because my situation was completely different than yours over the last several years with regards to China. So again, not very surprising, but I was worried, really worried in Shanghai Auto Show, and I'm just a bit more reinforced with my worry and concern that the legacy automakers just aren't up to the task. Shanghai kind of shows that. And so I had the opportunity to speak to a couple foreign automaker friends of mine off the record. So no names, but I get the impression that they're all in survival mode. They're all trying to find a bottom. They are still a little bit shell shocked because in a situation where you would think things would begin to let up, we see that the end of this year, Xiaomi is going to launch an SUV targeted directly at the Model Y. Next week, Onvo is going to be launching, which is NIO's. And I know a few of you want to talk about that a little bit. So happy to do that a little bit later. But Onvo is going to be launching on May 15th. They're having an event and they're going to show the exterior, not the interior yet, of the is it L6?
L60.
Yeah, L60, sorry. And that's going to be around 250,000 RMB. It's going to be built at NIO Park, where I visited yesterday. And within the next 3 months, XPeng is also going to be launching Mona.
So the Mona launch will be toward the end of June.
I tweeted earlier today, China EV Inc. launches brands like Legacy Auto launches products. And so we always have to be grounded in the numbers because NIO probably has at least 500,000 units or 400,000 units of capacity they need to go somewhere. And they're probably not going to hit 300,000 units this year. Everybody I talk to, Lay, is there's this disconnect between what the brand's able, what it seems like the brand's able to accomplish with people, users, and followers of NIO, and how that's not quite translating into sales. There's a lot of people scratching their heads on that stuff, but it's just going to be a crowded field. And Tesla with FSD is also going to be an also ran. It's not going to be unique. And you and I can personally say that because of the saddle time we spent in X-NGP, but you and I also sat in a Baidu. We sat in a deep route. I sat in a GBA for about 40-minute ride. I did NOA Li Auto just 2 days ago for about 25 minutes. So we've been in quite one of the ones that I don't have comments on yet is Huawei because I haven't been in that. But
yeah, same.
everyone is telling us that that's a 1-2 currently in the China market. So
1-2 being Huawei number one, XPeng number two in the advanced driver assist urban NOA feature.
So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on the auto show. And kind of to summarize some of the stuff that we talked about last week really quickly, because we haven't launched that episode yet. There was a ton of South American and Latin American media at BYD for their presser. A ton of Germans at the auto show because the Chinese government has given 12 countries visa-free access for 40 days. So you can expect a lot more Germans to come a lot more often to China on the not only OEM side, but the tier one side. Okay.
As a matter of fact, the last few days I've been in Shanghai, I am seeing a lot more foreigners. I can tell they're tourists in the subways in the Xintiandi where I spent the first full day there. So that's something. And then you talked about the different visits. So me adding to it is the visit to WeRide the day when I returned the G9 finally. This was on the 8th, I think. Yeah. So took a ride in a robo bus and one of those robo taxis. Last night, I randomly had a dinner with a dealer consultant friend of mine at the mall where they had the largest GBA showroom, and this young guy who's just gotten into the job like a month ago took the two of us out for a ride, and I tested out the NOA capabilities as well. Pretty impressive, considering it's vision only based.
So let me stop you there, Lei, because
it's called the PPA. Sorry, it's not NOA, it's PPA.
You're killing it, dude. You're killing it. But it's the only intelligent driving system that should be compared apples to apples to Tesla's because they're both vision only.
Yeah.
Every other system is uses LiDAR, but also GBA is basically a proxy for Baidu's Apollo system. So when you think about GBA, it works really well, but it's Baidu's system effectively.
Kind of surprised with that. What do you call that steering wheel? The U-shaped
yoke.
The yoke. Actually, I got used to it pretty fast, and everything voice activated. Basically, there wasn't a lot of touching going on, but just like speak to it, say things. It'll do some of the functions.
This is another one of those vehicles, Lei, that we think is a high quality product that just doesn't reflect in sales.
And they're giving this 49,000 RMB worth of packages of this high advanced driver assistant package before the end of May as kind of an incentive.
That's like $8,000 every month.
Yeah, like lifetime inclusion of all those whatever features.
On a 200,000 RMB car, on a $30,000 car.
200,000 RMB car. And as you mentioned, right, the hits are coming. The Envos, the Monas, Geely's, the E5 that they just announced, revealed, looks pretty sleek. And right,
And just so we give the foreign legacies a fair shake, because again, apologies, we should have got 163 out. We'll do that. But to talk a little bit about the legacies, Volkswagen came in a big way. They are redefining what the design language on their ID series vehicles are. They effectively hired a new designer, and now the design language is called ID code, and it's supposed to be DNA across all three of their joint ventures, the JAC, the FAW, and the SAIC. So they had a strong presence at the show, and XPeng happened to be right next to them. So that was a good synergy between those two. GM, the Buick GL8 or GL8 was introduced as a PHEV or PHEV, is what the GM folks call it. Chevy or Chevy had launched a couple PHEVs that were around 150, 180,000 RMB. So really cheap. And Cadillac had launched the Optic, which is, if you're familiar with a Cadillac Lyriq, is the little brother. So it slots right under the Lyriq. And it was a strange marketing strategy, because I understood about 65% of what they were saying, because everything is in Chinese. But their marketing slogan was option B. Let us be option B. And oh man, I talked to a few people at the press event, and I was like, I mean, I understand kind of generally what they're saying in Chinese, but it doesn't translate well. It doesn't. The option B doesn't translate well. But anyways, so it's a BEV, and it's a Cadillac, and it's going to be dropping at 250,000 RMB, so $32,000. So it's effectively almost at a mass market price level for a Cadillac product.
I think one of the jarring scenes that epitomizes the current landscape at the auto show was on the one extreme, Lei Jun and his entourage, the Xiaomi booth, versus seeing Mary Barra carrying her little handbag and just walking. Nobody probably even knew who she was.
We got to tell that story. So
that's kind of the epitomizes the if you want to say the GM or the foreign automakers versus the new forces, right, at this year's auto show and in this industry overall. Kevin, his article talked about these foreign automakers being cooked. I don't think it's a
exaggeration.
No, I don't think it's an exaggeration, to be honest. If we just pick GM, right? We pick someone. All of their brand dilution have been significant over the last few years. So and the joint ventures or the partners, I don't think they're on the same page.
They're not. They're all focused on their own domestic EV brands.
Yeah. So this is
So let's talk about that story, the Mary story, how we bumped into her, because Eunice Yoon, who is the correspondent for CNBC, she had reached out to me. Hey, can we do an interview? You're going to be at the auto show, I think. Let's meet at the Chevy booth. Let's meet at 9:30. So I'll go to the Chevy booth, and we set up a shot. And I happen to know one of the guys at Chevy, an expat, and he's talking. He's like, hey, there's going to be a surprise guest. Can't tell you who it is. And, we surmised.
It didn't really matter.
Yeah.
Like it didn't really matter. But
so I kind of mentioned it to Eunice, and Eunice was like, oh, I'm going to go see if she wants to, answer any questions or get an interview. And then Mary politely said, no media interviews this time around. So not only was Mary Barra there, Mike Royce was there, and Steve Hill, who coincidentally was appointed the GM China role 2 days ago.
Yeah.
So again, this goes back to what I'd mentioned earlier about the Volkswagens and the GMs and these other legacy automakers seeming to be in survival mode, because they haven't found a bottom yet. And when I mean bottom, sales are still declining. And to give you an example of how extreme it is, both Porsche and Ferrari Q1 sales in China are down. Porsche's 24%, Ferrari's down 20%. Porsche sales as a percentage of overall sales for China is much more significant. I think it's 35% of their sales. global sales. For Ferrari, it's about 12. So this should put to bed that even if the European brands that have so much heritage in Europe and these traditionalists who can't fathom a consumer buying a NIO over a BMW or a NIO over, a Porsche, there are no sacred cows in China. There are no heritage brands that will sell just because of the brand name. It doesn't work in China. Let me be clear.
Yeah.
You can feign your surprise, you can feign your shock, but the numbers don't lie. Porsche's going to continue to lose sales this year. So,
and that's their expectation too. So, but it was interesting. I mean, being in the different cities was interesting to see. Like in Shenzhen, obviously, all you see is BYDs, and in Shanghai, actually, you see a lot more NIOs. Right? You kind of see these regional discrepancies between which brands are doing, have
in
more.
Shanghai, you see a lot of MGs, a lot of rollways.
Rollways. I saw a rollway 75, like the ICE, like one of the very early rollways on the road.
You see a bunch of Buick Velites.
Yeah. A lot of Buick Sentries. Not the sedan Sentries, but the GL8 Sentries.
Yeah, the GL8. And Kevin talked about that because it might have been me that told him the Velites are basically fleet vehicles for DD.
Yeah, the Chevrolet Menlos, Velites or Velites. Yeah.
And one thing that we talked about, Lei, was not only from a city to city, how the brands are a bit stronger in certain cities, certain brands, certain cities. It's also the characteristics of X-NGP are tested because our first stop was Zhengzhou. So we tried to drive around 800 kilometers a day. So about 500 miles. And we were averaging on the highway, we were averaging probably between 100 and 120 kilometers an hour. We didn't pass the speed limit. And first of all, since you were the owner of the charging responsibility, maybe you can kind of give 3 bullet points of kind of your general thoughts on charging in China.
Yeah. So number one, I will say,
and Mike, this is for you.
Number one, I will say after this road trip, China EV road trip, is I am erasing range anxiety out of my vocabulary. That's number one, I will say, after this road trip. Second was the working conditions. Everything was smooth. We did not have one issue, except maybe that one charger that was charging a bit slow, and we kind of decided we move on and find another one.
But because we were spoiled.
Yeah, every charger we used was working, right? Regardless of how fast it was. And then, the extra few days I've had with the vehicles after the road trip, I charged at one of the XPeng's S4 360 kilowatt chargers. And then I also charged at an AC charging pile in the parking lot of the apartment where I was staying at 7 kilowatt. But there was an overnight charging, which was perfect. So there was different conditions, different type of charging. I think infrastructure-wise.
And to illustrate compatibility or to test compatibility, we used a Li charger, we used an XPeng charger, we used a NIO charger. What other? We did not use a Tesla. We did not use a Tesla.
We did not use a Tesla. CAMS chargers, the state grid chargers, the TELD, 特来电 chargers, all, just one socket, one standard scan, charge.
No range anxiety, and charging was generally pretty fast.
No range anxiety with an asterisk. That asterisk being you just need to plan a little bit.
Well, I was actually going to say this, Lei, because let's throw out the qualifiers. So XPeng did not pay us, and we did not, or they did not tell us or try to edit us. We could say whatever we want, and we do. So they don't have any editorial control, and we weren't paid. And you and I thought this up over 3 days, and we didn't plan anything. We just got in the car and went.
Well, the only thing we planned was we're going to do this in 3 days, which I asked some other people that have done this long trips. They said, it's more than enough to get you to Beijing from Shenzhen. So
but we're stretching it. We're stretching it because we would get in around 8 o'clock on most days. 7 o'clock.
But knowing beforehand which city to stop along the way, that's it. And then we're on the road, right? We
Yeah. So, I mean, effectively, we relied on the
the
infotainment system to tell us where to go.
yeah, the other asterisk is we did not we picked the right dates. That's the other asterisk, because had we gone during the May holidays, I think it would be a little bit more disastrous, because you've seen the videos of people fighting for chargers.
Yeah.
So that's yeah. So
The one thing that I'll say about the intelligent driving side, Zhengzhou less aggressive, Changsha like driving habits of the people and the traffic. Zhengzhou less aggressive, Changsha very aggressive, more aggressive than Beijing, Shanghai, in my opinion, and Shenzhen more aggressive than Zhengzhou, less aggressive than Changsha. So for Will at China Driven, he drove us, he picked us up. He was kind enough to take us out to dinner, and he picked us up in his ET7, and he was pretty aggressive. It was raining like crazy, and we went to this mall. So
yeah, I mean, I told XPeng that last year when I test drove the G6, the X-NGP had just rolled out the urban elevated highway X-NGP in Beijing, and I said then, as a I'm a 30-year-old. I've had my license since '94, so I would consider myself a 老司机, which is
yeah, okay.
yeah. And I had said last year I wouldn't have said I wanted to use XNGP, but this year after this trip, I said I do like to use it when I'm on the road, because the capabilities have gotten better.
Just for your feet and your legs.
Yeah, but
not having
not for
to
the
put
not for the eyes. So still have to
yeah.
pay attention. I think that's important to point out.
And the other thing to point out as well is that the XPeng system, you need to have your hand on the wheel, or at least shake it every once in a while. There is a driver monitoring system. There's a camera on the A pillar, so it sees if you're not looking at the road. It can tell when you're looking at your phone. I don't know how I know that. I just know that. And so Li Auto, you got to have your hand on the wheel. Li Jiyue, you got to have your hand on the wheel. And so each of these systems works differently that way too. But to your point, Lei, the kind people at Apollo, the Baidu folks, I rode in a taxi about 30 minutes in Yizhuang yesterday. And then the person I was sitting with, talking to, and she's like, well, so what'd you think? And I was like, I looked at her and I was like, it's kind of boring.
Yeah, that's what I tweeted too.
It's uninteresting. So these systems, are almost there. Now, again, these edge cases make them not safe, right? Not safe enough for sure. But for the highway miles, and let's say 90% of the trip was highway miles, I felt completely comfortable in the XPeng.
Yeah, so the total kilometer we did, including the last few days I've had the car, was 3,000 kilometers, and I would expect 2,500 of those were probably under NGP conditions. That's my rough. Yeah, so 90% would be 2,700. So I'd probably say a little bit less than that, but still.
So Lei, last but not least, do you have any questions for me about the 500,000? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should. Yeah, I mean, you were there. I was doing something else, but I think aside from that 500,000, I think there was a lot of the new president of the Envo brand. I think made an appearance. He was a former Disney marketing executive, and I think number 107 owner of the ES8 Founders Edition. So I think they actually had a lot. Li Bian talked quite a lot about Envo, right? And now you're seeing more info being pushed out.
So let me say this. Let me kind of go through the day that I had. I was effectively the only foreigner at the event, and it was cool. So we took a bus. So I flew from Beijing to Hefei, which is about a 2-hour high-speed rail from Shanghai. And so the morning of, we leave the hotel around 7:30, arrive at NIO Park at around 9 a.m., go into one side of the factory. Excuse me. And if you look at Twitter, you can see some of the pictures. There's a bunch of seats for media, dignitaries, and local government officials. They walk in, and it's the atmosphere is really positive. And you've been in Neo Park. I've been and worked
And I'll
in.
be there next week.
Yeah, so I've been and I've worked in a half dozen assembly plants. This is one of the cleanest factories you'll ever see. A ton of robots, a ton of robots. So if you're thinking Neo workers are all over the place putting a bolt in place, that's not right.
Did you notice? I don't know if you visit the factory. Did you notice they have a special color, a neo color for the KUKA
Yep.
robots, right?
Orange, orange and white. So
Yeah. So continue.
There's thousands of these KUKA robots. Okay, so there might have been one or two people there for doing QC or quality control, but anyways, a couple of so Lee Bin started out with a speech, and then iFly Tech CEO, who happened to be the owner of the 500,000th ES8, he did a pretty fiery speech, and he got people motivated. They're cheering. I understood a lot of what he said, but I've actually recorded it, and what Lei and I might try to do is get it translated, because I know there are certain videos floating out there. I sent one to Lei. He said the English translation is complete trash. So I have every speech recorded, and we might not post the entire speech, but there might be a couple sections that are worth, because I know Lee Bin talked about Tesla and the competition, and so I think those types of comments are worth posting. But we'll try to get some chopped up video up in the next week. So
yeah, so 2 points that you just mentioned. The KUKA robots are owned by Meidi, which in turn owns the Welling motor. That recently, if you remember, they rolled off this new electric motor component for NIO.
Right.
And iFlight Tech is a supplier to NIO of the
they do the voice control.
Yeah, voice thing, which iFlight Tech is probably one of the biggest companies in that space.
Yep.
So
and they also happen to be in Hefei.
In Hefei, yeah. So one of the Hefei, homegrown champions, as you would say in Chinese. So those are the 2 points. And I think going back to the Envo launch, similar to the Zeekr IPO, I think they're happening actually at a good momentum, because we saw the April deliveries. Both Zeekr and NIO were pretty good. And I'm hearing that NIO's recent order intake was pretty good as well. And what I think it was either Li Bian or Qin Hong who mentioned that they're starting Envo at, they have a much, this new brand is building on one more than 1,000 battery swap station, whatever, how many charging stations NIO have. So it's not like when NIO started. So they're talking about it being a 1 to 10 rather than 0 to 1.
Right.
And I think the expectations are, again, pretty lofty. I'm hearing, 20,000, 25,000 a month.
They need that to fulfill that capacity at NIO Park. And then where's the other place that they build? Is it?
It's in JAC NIO, which is the other side of the town.
Right. So NIO Park is NIO employees building NIO cars. JAC is JAC building NIO cars. Just FYI. But yeah, I watched Lee Bin for that hour because, so let me finish my description. Big speeches, and then at the end, all the employees came up, took a big picture under the 500,000 flag. Everybody seemed super excited, like genuinely happy, right? Genuinely proud. And I was like pretty pumped up for them because, 500,000 is a lot, right? For where they came from. And so a bunch of people took a picture around the car.
Yeah.
Some KOLs interviewed Lee Bin in front of the car. And so you probably see a little bit of chop video and that stuff. And what else did we do?
They also prided themselves on, being, to this day, the number one BEV brand above 300,000 RMB. Right. So I think they talk a lot about that. But
I think people speak in a disappointing way with NIO, and I know sometimes I do, but it's because everything just the things that you could normally point to that would be challenging for them. It doesn't seem like they're challenged in those ways. It's just the numbers, and Will has an ET7, so he's got a handful of frustrations. And
That ET7 looked old because
yeah,
things are iterating fast.
yeah. Well, and Will's not very happy about that either. But and then so I talked to another friend who has an ET5 Touring, and he's a big NIO fan, but he said that there's he had a front wheel problem, and he showed me the app. He had the car for 297 days, and they couldn't fix it after the 10th time. So he still said the above 80 kilometers an hour it shakes a little bit. So he's a little frustrated with that. But man, the ET5 Touring is a beautiful, beautiful car. So, and then they gave us cupcakes. Li Bin and Qin Li Hong did like an hour long Q&A with the media. And so that's when the Envo CEO came up. He was wearing a white t-shirt, shorter guy. And, I couldn't help but to think this is Li Bin's environment because he controlled that room. He seemed like so natural and just he wanted to be there. It seemed like.
And remember, also Envo is now counting from when Li Bin had the idea in 2021. It's also they mentioned something about turning 3 years old, and then really that journey. The rest of it is really getting to 30 years old.
Well, that's 0, 1, 1 to 10, and then 10 to 1,000.
These China, kind of the colloquial speak or something. So really, Envo is not. It's 3 years old basically because he had the idea starting in 2021 that they had to have this kind of the lower tier brand. I think it's just natural.
Li Bin's he's a likable guy. He's a pretty humble guy, and he just so, and that was cool that he spent an entire hour talking to the media. And then after that we did our tour, and I was pretty like focused because that's where I made my bones in working in factories for the first couple of years of my life. And so just kind of looking, comparing and contrasting how the US does it, old to new, how things are different now, and how there are so many of those robots that follow the line on the floor to move parts, to move racks. So super, super automated plant. And then they also took us over to the motor factory.
The E-motor, that's the E2, I believe. Yeah.
Yep. And there's 600,000 units. Each vehicle has 2 motors, so that's why there's 600,000 unit capacity. They did say that in the future they would consider selling the e-motors to other manufacturers. So
yeah, I think we mentioned that before on our show that right now if you look at XPeng, right, they're kind of becoming to Volkswagen almost kind of a supplier, and NIO with the recent battery tie-up, one more with GAC Group and the e-motors. There could be a lot of opportunities for different revenue streams. I think, again, this is not first time we've seen this kind of lofty expectations of whether a new brand or model and then how it actually performs on the market. I think in recent times we've seen enough of the higher the expectations that it's just, I think that's part of the competition where the foreign automakers are not even, let's say they're probably not even relevant.
No, so let me put it this way, Lei. I believe that not only the foreign automakers in survival mode, but some of the Chinese EV brands are in survival mode. The difference is that these Chinese EV brands, XPeng, NIO, they're playing offense. They're launching new products, launching refreshes, launching new brands. So they're not sitting still waiting to get picked off. And I think but they also have the ability to move as fast as they need to. Okay. And I can't help but to think that the foreign legacies, they likely have a disproportionate amount of foreign suppliers that supply them. And it's not just an OEM that needs to move fast, it's their entire supply chain to support that speed. And My guess would be a Tesla, a NIO, an XPeng. 90% of their suppliers are Chinese, and so they're conditioned to be responsive in order to keep up with what the changing and evolving environment and market in China is. And I think just like the legacy automakers, the foreign OEM, not OEM, but the foreign tier ones might be struggling to keep up with the pace of China as well. So
Yeah.
so hey, I think we're good. And there's some questions. Peter Lill was talking about your charging rate. Do you remember what some of the rates were?
So the highest I've gotten on that 360 kilowatt S4 was 211 kilowatt.
No, I mean price cost. I mean,
A price. So it's anywhere, it's usually around the 1.5, 1.6, 1.7, 1.8 MMB per kilowatt hour.
okay.
But that entails two things. So the electricity itself and the service fees, which usually, if I remember, was half. So really half the cost was electricity and half of that was service. And those changes depending where you are. So, but I think I remember the slow charging I did the other night, the overnight slow charging, I think it was like 100 MMB for 70 kilowatt hours of electricity.
Oh,
right. So
let's do this. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. Mike, instead of you typing in the thing, why don't you raise your hand? I'll bring you up so you can ask us your question. But tell us about your dad's awesome golf museum.
Oh yeah, that's. I mean, we didn't include those fringe programs, right?
Yeah.
Even
so Lei and I weren't sitting around doing nothing when we weren't doing car stuff. So
one of the reason we had wanted to do this road trip because I was going into heading for Shenzhen for the Volvo China Open, which is being held at this golf course, which is where my dad's second dream of opening a golf heritage museum was taking place. So is to visit him, is to be checking out we got free tickets, right? Check out the Volvo China Open golf tournament.
Met up with the snowball team.
Met up with we got to mention met up with the homeboy now,
yes.
Taylor,
his,
Bridget, and Jack, and his
ordered some KFC using a Meituan drone.
yeah, hats off. So we witnessed the opening of the Golf Heritage Museum, which my dad is the current, what do you call it? The Guanzhang, which means the director. Or on the last day of the final round after the final round, the winner was announced at the Volvo China Open. It was really inspiring for me because after, he started China Auto Review, this is his second dream coming true and he's 80 years old. And my parents are in Scotland right now. They're still traveling around. So like for us to be doing what we do, I get a lot of inspiration from him, to be honest. And just we're also nerds, right? Right, like this trip, we talked about it 2 months ago. I sent you a message and say, let's get a car and drive down. We need to be in Shenzhen and spend some time visiting local companies. And again, if you want to see NEVs, you go to China. If you want to see the variety of NEVs, you go to Shenzhen. I think Shenzhen, to me, we saw some innovates, right?
Yeah, and it's still well. No. Well, which well? The
Skywell.
Skywell.
Yeah, we saw quite a few WM motors.
Yeah,
like the ones you don't often see.
I'm just gonna do a picture dump of some of the cars we saw. So, it's on episode 163, but you might as well tell them the story about the Xiaomi owner at the charging station.
Yeah, well. So Xiaomi's April delivery official numbers was what, 7,000 units, and one of them, at least we know one of them is a flipper. Is somebody this family paid 30,000 RMB extra to get a standard edition, which is 219,000 RMB.
So we had stopped to
charge
at
one of the rest areas.
I saw an SU7 charging, and Lei and I walked over there. Lei just started talking to the guy, super young guy with a wife, small
young family,
child. Yeah. And so what you would expect of an SU7 owner, to be honest.
Yeah.
And he was less than 30 years old, probably 30 years
Probably
old.
right around 30. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I would say that tells me, I would say maybe 10% of the sales are going to speculators who want to make an extra buck on the SU7. That's my thought.
And let me share two numbers that people might not know. The official Beijing Auto Show organizers said 892,000 people visited during the 10-day show. And Xiaomi put out a post said 152,000 visited the Xiaomi booth. What's the percentage? I don't know. A fifth or more?
Almost 20%, man.
The other ones, ever since the launch of the Xiaomi SU7 on March 28th, I think this is day 40 or 41 since then, every single day they've launched this, they've pushed out this Q&A style, like frequently asked questions every day of the different type of questions that people ask, and they put the answers on there and they pushed out in their WeChat channel. And 353 questions have been asked and answers, and they put those, through their channel in the 40 days. It's some, like, these are some of the simple things that you wouldn't think of people doing, but Xiaomi is doing it to making it more transparent and helping with the sales and marketing.
Well, first of all, Lei Jun is front and center for a lot of this stuff. I mean, he's tweeting a lot on X.
Well, his, not himself, but his team,
well,
obviously.
His account is.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And Li Bin uses a lot of social media and KOLs and influencers. So that's just, in the legacy automakers, they feel uncomfortable with that, but it works. Remember, was it Englandlath who had to quarantine for 2 weeks?
Yeah. I'm surprised he didn't do more this time.
Yeah, he posted about it. That thing was super popular.
Yeah.
And so that's all I have. But there's a couple questions, so I want to make sure that we answer them. Mike the Car Geek, if you advised GM, Volkswagen, Toyota, would you tell them to give up on China? You lost, or triple, quadruple investment to keep trying? Let me take this one first, and we'll get your thoughts next, Lei. Mike, I would tell them to find a partner, like an XPeng, Volkswagen, Stellantis, Leapmotor. They obviously cannot. The China market is way too important for every foreign legacy to just not be a part of it. And with regards to Toyota, Volkswagen, and GM, they still have significant sales. We're talking a couple million. And so if they can quickly find that bottom, then they can start to climb their way out. The challenge is that most of them are still, they still haven't hit that bottom. And so I think the world is going to bifurcate. And it's the reason GM owns Cruise, but also invests heavily in Momenta. It's why Volkswagen is partnering with Horizon, Thundersoft, and and XPeng. So, but what are your thoughts, Lei?
I think there's really only three options you can do: double down, pick your battle, and leave. And I can give you three examples. For the pick your battle, Ford has done it, which I think is smart. Leave, which means Chevrolet, Buick, even Cadillac, they leave, meaning maybe no longer producing in China. I think it's very high possibility that one of these brands exits. Let's say Chevrolet. I don't think it's a surprise at all if it does happen. And then double down, meaning I think the Germans are at the top of the pyramid in terms of doubling down in China. We saw that at the Volkswagen Group night. We saw BMW, Mercedes all doubling down. So there's really three options that you can have, and some of it, let's say the Stellantis was one, I believe, picking the battle, a different path, which is investing into Leapmotor and utilizing their kind of the technology, and Leapmotor utilizing their international channels, which next week they're officially announcing that sales joint venture, right? I think that's it. There's no other. What else can you do? And the tides have turned.
And I'll also emphasize that it's a constant assessment, because Lei and I, and Lei, if I'm putting words in your mouth, please correct me, But 14 months ago, I think both of us kind of thought Stellantis was dead in the China market. And then this announcement comes with Leap Motor, and now they seem really reinvigorated. And so my concern with a GM or one of the foreign legacies is that they willy-nilly procrastinate, but ultimately decide that the China market is too important. But all the good partners are gone. So it ends up being a Ford Chang'an situation where the JV just never, ever meshes because Chang'an, there's a specific reason Chang'an was one of the last dance partners. And it's because they're notoriously difficult to deal with. And Ford, because they didn't go bankrupt, they did a good thing and stayed out of bankruptcy. They had to shore up their domestic sales and operations and didn't have the opportunity to invest in China as early as a GM or some of these other companies did. And so my concern is that if they do decide to partner, they do it earlier rather than later, or risk being partnered with the least attractive Chinese brand. So anyways, let me make sure. Does anyone know what is Onvo's sales delivery target for this year? I do not know what that is.
Well, delivery starts, I think in Q4, I believe. So it's probably not going to be significant. But based on what Li Bin said about getting to that second 500,000 units much faster, you could kind of do your math, right? And expectations of in that segmentation, the Tesla killer, whatever you want to call it, you can imagine the type of volumes they want to do a monthly volume, right? Let's just say if they do 20,000 units, again, we're putting ourselves on the spot. Like, quite a few models that we kind of talked about have flopped. I'd say 20,000 units is probably a good gauge of how well it does. And also remember, I just remember, they're only going to launch 3 models for the Onvo brand. At least that's what Li Bin says. So this one, another SUV, and the third model. So family, purely focused on the family segment.
So had a good chat with Li Auto. They are supposed to be launching 4 more products before the end of the year.
Well, the next 3 BEVs, I believe, right?
Yeah. So likely that mini mega. Okay. And for the folks that are wondering about the mega, I really like it. It didn't seem when I drove it like it was 5 meters big, and they emphasized this. The second row has the legroom of an extended or a long wheelbase 7 Series. The third row has the leg room of a long wheelbase 5 Series.
I did sit in the third row at the auto show. I'm 6'2", 6'3", so 189 cm. It was very roomy in the third row. So
and the screens are amazing. I'm sitting in the back watching the screen, and it's beautiful.
Those are what you expect, right? I mean, all the new ones, some of the new ones that were shown, the Wei Lanshan, the Dongfeng E-Pi, the new Stera ET. I mean, they're all like that.
So let me just say this to my traditional automotive alumni, which I am one of, and the fit and finish of the Li Auto, and for that fact, the G9. There was no squeaks. This was a pool car, so it's probably not treated very nicely. I'm talking about the G9, and we drove 2,500 kilometers. There was not a squeak, not a rattle, no quality issues, nothing that I could look at and think of. Now the vehicle was super dirty, so I didn't really get a chance to look at the exterior very thoroughly. But normally on rental cars or cars that aren't taken care of very well, you'll hear rattles, you'll hear whatever wind noise. You and I sat next to each other, obviously in the front seats. You and I didn't have to yell or scream or talk loudly. We could hear each other pretty well. So I think the sound deadening for the interior was pretty good. Sound deadening in the Mega is excellent. But
yeah, I think it was just a solid car from all fronts. There's no, major significant issue that we saw.
And it's a victim of circumstance because 350
underappreciated, victim of circumstances, but right, that's the reflection of the competition.
See, this is the one thing. If you don't believe me, and as someone who's worked in assembly plants and understands American quality, German quality, European quality, read Kevin Williams' article. Reviews American cars all day long. He ripped on the Blazer. He ripped on the Lyric, rightfully so, because they had a lot of problems. So read what he says, because if you don't trust me or don't believe me, the fit and finish, they're already. This is why it's frustrating to me when people kind of compare the Japanese and Koreans to what's going on with China right now, because from day one, these cars would be selling a lot.
I would say it's also important to know, in about 10 days, I will go back to my good old Santa Fe hybrid with that little head unit, and having driven the G9 for 10 days, it's going to get some used to. But the things that we see here in China fitting the Chinese consumer taste, they're not going to work in the US if you just try to, bring it all over. And right, you do have to kind of cater to the local taste. Aside from this tariff, right? That are they going to be even allowed to go in the first place? But it's
the one thing that should scare them is that we know that they're quick learners.
Yeah.
So it's not going to take 5 years for them to figure out what the U.S. consumer wants versus what the Chinese consumer wants.
I think I just heard a clip of somebody tweeted a clip of Trump saying he doesn't want Chinese building in Mexico. He wants Chinese building in the U.S.
No, I said that. Right? I said that. Like, no, so he had a speech in March where he said, "I'm going to raise tariffs to 100% or by 100% or something like that." And then he was the next sentence, the following sentence, he was like, "Babuadi, we invite you to come build in the U.S." Nobody picked up on that sentence. So, anyways, but hey, let me make sure there are no last questions. Well, China Driven wrote, "Well, the Li Auto screens are 4th gen OLEDs, slightly smaller than the competitors, but the panel quality is way, way better." Yes, the Li Auto quality screens are amazing. So, I think that's it, Lei.
I think the last thing I wanted just to say, I think I'm so happy that Kevin and a lot of the rest of the world got to come over to China, to the Beijing Auto Show, and anywhere else for that matter, to see the action on the ground. And some of them might be shocked, but I think for us, it's fact of life. Just things the way they are. I don't feel that jarring feel anymore, whether it's the robo-taxis, whether it's the green license plates. It just... Well, that's where it's progressed, right? And then where do we go from there?
The important thing to remember right now, anyways, is that they're really just beating the shit out of each other. So
that is true. Which is this kind of bloodbath and the price war, which is causing more people holding their pocket because they're wondering, who's going to come out with a cheaper product next day or week.
Yeah. So, but yeah, that is all I had. Let me make sure. I actually had to write notes down. Yeah, that's all I had, man. So cool. Hey, everyone, apologies for being inconsistent the last few weeks. We're going to have the live show again starting this week moving forward. Lei will be back in the US. We might actually even make it a video show. So we're still working through all that stuff, but thanks again for joining us. Please catch us again next week. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Lee, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoToInsight. AutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at LeiXing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China, EVs, and more.